Tábhar 18. The Wooing of Eadaoin. Her name was Fumnach, which means loud and resonant, and it suited her. Everything she did was loud, every action resounding. She spoke loudly, she loved loudly, she shared her opinions with echoes. She was queen over Bríle with Madir her king, and together they were father and mother to a usual 150 foster children. Peacekeeping in the times of the Tuatha Dé Danann was very hands-on work, but they were the most trusted foster parents in Ireland. So much so that even the Dagda and the goddess Bowen entrusted them with their son, Angus Og, who would grow to be the very god of love and death, and who none could resist loving. Fumnach was no exception. But Fumnach's most resounding actions, however, would come after the quiet leaving footsteps of her husband, Madir. When Angus Og had grown and reclaimed his birthright of Brún na Bóinne, which we know as Newgrange, Madir went to visit him, and though Fumnach made it very clear to Madir, as well as several nearby grazing cattle, that she missed her foster son and wanted to see him just as much as Madir, there was a realm to rule and 150 odd wee ones to rear. A queen has her duties. The sun-seared waters of the Boyne River wrapped lazily around a field perfect for hurling. Angus Og and Madir watched the game grow bloodier and bloodier until Madir, feeling kingly, intervened to break up a particularly deadly league. A rogue come on or hurl caught him in the face, striking his eye clean from his head. Every player froze. Slither and score forgotten. No king may rule unless whole. Angus Og rushed Madir away from the crowd, sending for the druid Dian Cecht, the most skilled in healing of all living. Dian Cecht managed to restore Madir's eye, and in so doing his right to rule. But the relief Angus Og earned that day wilted like droughted farmland by the following dusk. Madir's eye had survived the battering, but his pride certainly hadn't. He began asking things of Angus Og, horses and chariots and cattle, until he finally demanded the most beautiful woman in all to feel unable to deny a mere king such requests. But fathers of all types have strange powers over their children. Angus Og dutifully found his foster father, the most beautiful of women findable, 18. Her hair was a waterfall of gold, her skin a delicacy of cream, but her eyes held fires. She agreed to this proposal to a king, but her price was steep. She did not leave her home until Angus Og had cleared 12 plains and scored 12 new rivers and paid her weight in gold and silver. A woman who knows her worth demands nothing less. Madir's pride was not only soothed, but swelled. Satisfied, he returned to Bríle and his first wife. A year and a day since she last seen him, Fumnach watched her husband enter their hall with another woman by his side, where she walked. He had sent no word, made no attempt to abide by the laws of ruling and hierarchies within marriages, no. He simply appeared with another stray, only this one was not a child to rear and teach and love. This was a woman, grown and beautiful, with a mind fierce and formed on its own. A woman who strode across Fumnach's hall, her footsteps echoing, and sat in Fumnach's own throne. And Madir sat beside her, expecting Fumnach to take a lesser seat and allow this Eadaoin to take her place in their realm. He expected her to be silent. Fumnach drew the rowan rod her druid foster father had given her and struck this child of a woman with it, turning her into a puddle. Medeire's indignation was lost to Fumnach's smugness, as the puddle steamed and evaporated before them, until all that was left was a large, irritatingly beautiful fly. She fluttered to Medeire's shoulder, and from her wings came the sweetest music Fumnach had ever heard, soft and delicate and enchanting. Medeir turned from her, his rage forgotten, his wife forgotten again, preferring instead the company of the fluttering, shuddering Eadaoin. Days passed this way, until Fumnach could bear the insult no more. She threw back her head and raised her voice to a shout. Guiha hui, guiha has, guiha here is guiha her, togagi wem on quillog shugadio. Winds of the north, winds of the south, winds of the west and winds of the east, take away from me this fly forever. And the gales answered her bellows, sweeping Eadaoin from Medeire's shoulder and into a private storm that did not end but carried her, helpless, away from Medeir, away from Brile, away from the valley of children she could never hope to mother so well. Eadaoin was trapped on whispering wings that were no match for the might of Fumnach's winds, winds that howled even louder than she who summoned them. She was hurled into the unceasing surf of the wild seas for 7 salt-soaked years. By chance, she landed on Angus Oge's breast on the beach, and for a time he gave her shelter. But Fumnach heard of this and sent a fresh, raging gale that roared Eadaoin out of the very age of the Tuatha De Danann itself. When she finally spun to a stop, it was over an Ulster Queen's house, and, exhausted, she fell through the rafters and into the Queen's cup just as she took a sip. It was the last moment Eadaoin would remember of that life. That queen had a daughter 9 months after drinking a fly that wasn't a fly, and called her Eadaoin. That girl grew into the most beautiful woman in Ireland, though she had no memory she'd once been called that before. When the Ardrí, the High King, Ochad Aram, called for tax in his first year, the people would not pay it because he lacked a queen. And of all the women he could choose, he chose Eadaoin as his queen. And queenship suited her. It had a familiarity to it she couldn't place, and life by Ochad Aram's side passed with a sunless warmth to them, a satisfaction that went beyond queenly comforts. But this bliss was quickly soured like milk left out to turn, and a sorrowing frost stole over their lives. Ochad Aram's brother, Aoife Anglanach, fell into a sickness that stole his strength and smile, and though it seemed not to spread, none could escape his failing spirits. Ochad Aram's chief physician, Fachna, could not heal him, and one night on her way to her chambers, Eadaoin heard tense whispers as Ochad Aram demanded Fachna tell him the cause of his brother's looming death. Fachna knew the root of the sickness, but on Aoife Anglanach's order would not speak it, even to the High King. That night, Eadaoin held her husband as looming grief rocked their bed. The demands of the High King cannot be delayed for matters even so dire as this, and soon Ochad Aram was drawn from Tara to see to the rest of Ireland. He knew that before his return his brother would be dead. He entrusted his caretaking to Eadaoin alone, and left her to see that his grave be dug, that the most keening lamentations be sung, and that all his cattle be slaughtered upon his death. Eadaoin kissed her grieving husband farewell, and, once his horse was but a fly on the horizon, she went to sit by her dying brother-in-law. Aoife Anglanach had barely spoken for weeks, as though someone had stolen his tongue. That night, with Eadaoin's voice in his ears, he finally found his. He told her the true cause of his sickness, that despite his great yearning not to, he was drowning in love for her. Fachna had confirmed the only cure for this disease was for her to lie with him, and Ailill Anglanach had forbade the mere mention of it. But having said a final farewell to his only brother, and in hearing the delicate music of her songs, his resistance failed him and the words slipped from his tongue like birds released from a cage. Eadaoin considered. Surely sparing her husband the grief he so ached from would be more a kindness than it would be a wound to tryst with his brother to save him. Could this be her duty as wife? As queen, to save so many head of cattle? She agreed, but she would not lie with him in her home with Uachad Aram. They would meet in a nearby house upon a hill later that night. When the moon rose to the sparkling hour, Ailill Anglanach arrived to Eadaoin's borrowed bed. She deigned to her cure that night, and the next, and on the third she was sure that this man in her arms was not Ailill Anglanach. She pushed the impostor away and stood fierce, starlight painting her silhouette through the open window, and demanded his identity. She did not agree to a tryst with any but the love-dying Ailill Anglanach, and whoever this trickster was better be a match for the might of her and the High King's wrath. The silver light of the night gathered around the impostor until a pillar of moonlight shrouded him. In a blink, it vanished, revealing a man of otherworldly beauty. He straightened himself proudly and looked at Eadaoin with eyes naked with longing and something that was frighteningly like love. "Who are you?" Eadaoin said, her voice less certain now. "I am Midir of Bríle," he said, "and you are my wife, my sweet Eadaoin." A silence beat between them, and Eadaoin had time to hope it wasn't their hearts beating in sync. "My husband is Uachad Aram," she said, "and no other." Midir smiled, the moon casting sorrowful shadows across his face, and shook his head. He told her of a life she had held and forgotten, an age ago when the Tuatha De Danann still lived above the fairy mounds, open and plain in Ireland, not hidden away as they did now. He told her of a worthy bride price and a jealous, vicious wife who couldn't bear Eadaoin's own beauty and Midir's love for her, and of a curse of wings and wind. He told her of a curse he himself had laid on Ailill Anglanach, one now lifted, filling him with a sickening longing so that the two would meet, and enchanting him with a sleep so Midir could take his place. Finally, he told her the time had come for Eadaoin to return to Bríle, and the queenship that suited one of her beauty and status. "I have a realm, and a king," Eadaoin said in a voice frostier than the night, before disappearing into it. Sometime later, while overlooking Tara, Uachad Aram came upon a stranger with a fiddleboard. The stranger introduced himself as Midir and invited Uachad Aram to play. Uachad Aram readily agreed, eager to prove his superior wooden wisdom to his wife's first husband, and sat down on the other side of the square board and deftly pegged in his pieces. It was a fine set, each piece perfectly peaked and artistically speckled, carved to perfect smoothness. The kings quickly agreed to play for prizes, and in the first game, Uachad Aram captured all of Midir's pieces and won himself 50 horses. In the next, he annihilated the Fae king and won a causeway across a bog near the Shannon. Emboldened, Uachad Aram agreed to Midir's suggestion that for the fourth game, the winner decide the prize. The game was over in half the time of its predecessors, and Uachad Aram's pieces lay in a pile at Midir's feet. Furious, the High King was bound to agree to Midir's prize when he asked to hold and kiss Eadaoin, but he hesitated. He told Midir he may come to Tara for his prize, but in 1 month's time. A month later, every available army and warrior of Ireland surrounded Achad Aram's stronghold. His hall was a sea of fire-lit spears as torches flickered from every bracket. Eadaoin stood at his side, his sword ready at the other. Midir walked in without a hint of fear and smiled at Eadaoin. In a voice smug as an overfed goose, he told Eadaoin that her mortal king had given her away over a mere game. Achad Aram snarled over the lie, but Midir barely glanced at him. He had eyes for Eadaoin and no one else. With her head held high, Eadaoin loosed her fingers from Achad Aram's crushing grip and walked to meet Midir. He held his arms out to her, and she stepped stiffly into them. Midir wrapped his arms around the Queen of Tara, and the moment his lips touched her cheek, smoke billowed from their feet, thick and white, consuming them as though they were alight in fire. Achad Aram cried out, and his men surged forward, but the smoke was faster, swirling over Midir and Eadaoin in moments and up, following the black, oily smoke of the torches to the hole in the ceiling, leaving nothing behind where they had stood. Achad Aram leapt after them, reaching for his wife, but the smoke drifted uncaringly through his fingers. As the last of it curled through the rafters, he raced outside in time to see two swans flying high into the sun, away from Tara, away from Ireland, away from Achad Aram. The High King wasted no time. The other world was not unreachable, and he devoted himself to finding it. He tore every fairy tree apart, passed under every blackthorn and hawthorn crossing, dug up every fairy ring. But after a year and a day, he had found nothing. Midir came to him then, when he was alone in another disappointment of a forest. Achad Aram only stayed his weapons when Midir promised him he would give him a chance to win his wife back. He led him to a clearing filled with over 50 women, and every single one of them was the image, from golden waterfall to fire-filled eyes, of his Eadaoin. If you know her, Midir said, you can take her. Achad Aram turned in a circle, staring from face to identical face. He walked among them, looking deeper into eyes he had dreamed of, taking hold of hands he had missed. He knew none but his own Eadaoin could pour a drink with such pure elegance, and he bade a woman to do so. The water poured in a perfect silvery ribbon from jug to cup, with the final drop wavering like dew to the lip. It was more than elegant, it was musical, mesmerizing. He stared into the fair woman's eyes and recognized the soul he saw there. I know this woman, he said, certain. Then you may go, Midir answered, the smallest of smiles lilting his lips. In a series of puffs of white smoke, the other women vanished. But that is not your wife, Midir continued, the smile growing. She was pregnant when we flew from Tara, one of your years ago. In that time, your child was born and grew to as fine a woman as her mother. Don't you think, Achad? Achad Aram turned to his daughter, his heart a chaos of love and regret and fury. He turned back to Midir, a roar rising in his throat, but in the same moment he had vanished in a final swirl of white smoke and laughter, and the High King's cry was left to echo in the forest, heard only by the daughter that he did not know.